I would love to introduce Lisa Baudoin from Books and Company in Oconomowaukee. Hi.
Hi, thank you all for coming tonight. I am so thrilled to be hosting Shelby tonight, so this is great. I want to start with a quote from Jamie Ford, who's the author of The Hotel at the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, because he's got it nailed. Shelby Van Pelt has done the impossible. She's created a perfect story with imperfect characters that is so heartwarming, so mysterious, and so completely absorbing, you won't be able to put it down, because when you're not reading this book, you'll be hugging it. And if you've been in our store recently, you'll see Tony walking around hugging the book. She just absolutely loves it. Born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, Shelby Van Pelt is now missing the mountains, as I do myself, and living in the suburbs of Chicago with her husband and 2 children. Remarkably Bright Creatures, Remarkably, is her first novel. So welcome, Shelby. We're thrilled to have you. And do you want to start maybe with a little bit of a reading to give us a flavor of the story?
Sure, I would love to. I'm going to read one of my favorite sections. It comes a little ways into the book, but it's not spoilery. And if you've read the book, you know that it is partially narrated by a giant Pacific octopus. His name is Marcellus. He's very snarky. He's a bit of a curmudgeon. And, he's the type of guy. He's not a guy, he's an octopus, but he's the type of character that just has opinions about everything and loves to just kind of pontificate about his observations of the human world. So I'm going to read one of his short little sections here. This is day 1309 of my captivity. You humans love cookies. I assume you know which food I mean. Circular, about the size of a common clamshell. Some are flecked with dark bits, others are painted or dusted with powder. Cookies can be soft and quiet, moving soundlessly on their journey through human jaws. Cookies can be loud and messy, bits breaking off at the bite, crumbs tumbling down a chin, adding to the flotsam on the floor that the elderly female called Tova must sweep. I have observed many cookies during my captivity here. They are sold in the packaged food machine near the front entrance. Imagine my confusion then at the remark made by Dr. Santiago earlier this evening. What can I say, Terry? Dr. Santiago raised her shoulders and held her hands up. I've seen a lot of octopuses, but you've got a smart cookie here. They were discussing the so-called puzzle. Hinged box made of clear plastic with a latch on the lid. There was a crab inside. Terry lowered it into my tank. He and Dr. Santiago leaned down to peer through the glass. Without delay, I seized the box, opened the latch, lifted the lid, and ate the crab. It was a red rock crab, one that was molting, soft, and juicy. I consumed it in a single bite. This did not please Terry and Dr. Santiago. They frowned and they argued. I gathered they anticipated my dismantling of the box to take longer. I am a smart cookie. Well, of course I am intelligent. All octopuses are. I remember each and every human face that pauses to gaze at my tank. Patterns come readily to me. I know how the sunrise will play on the upper wall at dawn, shifting each day as the season progresses. When I choose to hear, I hear everything. I can tell when the tide is turning to ebb outside the prison walls based on the tone of the water crashing against the rocks. When I choose to see, my vision is precise. I can tell which particular human has touched the glass of my tank by the fingerprints left behind. Learning to read their letters and words was easy. I can use tools. I can solve puzzles. None of the other prisoners have such skills. My neurons number 500 million, and they are distributed among my 8 arms. On occasion, I have wondered whether I might have more intelligence in a single tentacle than a human does in its entire skull. Smart cookie. I am smart, but I am not a snack object dispensed from a packaged food machine. What a preposterous thing to say. So that's Marcellus. He's always fun to read. And it's one of my favorite little stories about that chapter is that it almost got cut out of the book. There was just, in the editing process, I feel like editors are always trying to get you to just make it shorter. Like, it's cheaper for them to produce books that are a little bit shorter. And I'm not saying that, my editors they were great editors, but everything was sort of like, you just look at everything with a really critical eye. Like, do we really need this? What is this really adding? And that one was on the chopping block at one point, but I fought to keep it because I was like, it's Marcellus. It just needs to be there.
studies have shown, I mean, they'll say like, you need to have this many words, and and after that, readership goes down. How could that be gone? How could somebody not love that?
Well,
Yeah.
I think I had to tweak it a little bit. I think I added a couple things that made it a little bit more like, okay, we're conveying information that the reader needs to know. I think I added the bit about how learning to read the words was easy. It's conveying information that, like, because people are wondering, oh, how can octopus read? Well, this is how. But yeah, it's funny, the things that, I think that we thought when we were editing, like, oh, is there going to be too much octopus in this book? And we were worried that there would be too much. And the reaction from readers has been the absolute opposite. They want more Marcellus. They want a whole book of Marcellus. So yeah. It's funny how that shakes out.
If novels were reality shows, how could Marcellus not win fan favorite?
Yeah.
Lisa, ask a more serious question.
Well, because I wanted to talk about Marcellus too, because he has such a philosophical outlook. And, how did that come right away? Because we don't always assign, I guess I can't make that assumption, but, he's so observant and philosophical, and sort of links the whole book together. And I won't mention the fact that he also counts the number of days he's in a specific place, Daniel, as so do you. You're part Octopus.
I felt a particular bond, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to add to that. Like, I seem to remember you saying in your interviews that Marcellus, the book started with Marcellus. And I'm wondering how his personality morphed as you were writing, because this can't be that wasn't the first words you wrote of Marcellus. I'm just curious as to how you've molded him.
Well, I mean, it started by just imagining, as I think a lot of us do when you go to a zoo or an aquarium and you see animals, particularly very, very intelligent ones like, an octopus or, certain types of primates, and they're captive, and it's a little bit, it gives you mixed feelings. At least it gives me mixed feelings of like, well, we know that they can think and feel, and, so what must this experience be like for them? And I don't say that to be, anti-zoo or aquarium, but just particularly in the case of an octopus where we really don't know what they know. They are so intelligent, but they're wired so differently from us that I feel like people are still learning, scientists are still learning new things about them every day, about what goes on inside their brains, so to speak. And yeah, so I just, thought, well, what would they be thinking? And that's where the snarky voice really came out of a sense of superiority that, the idea of this octopus being just incensed at being held captive by an inferior in his view of species. But it really, I think from there, it kind of morphed into, well, now you're in a closed box, and he knows, because he can read, that his life is coming to an end. And like you said, he is counting the days. And that's where it kind of started getting into some of this more philosophical stuff. I had originally wanted to name him Marcus Aurelius, who was the famous Stoic.
Yeah.
And the feedback that I got from some of my critique partners was like, well, no, Shelby, don't do that. That's just, you don't want it to sound like a philosophy book. It's too on the nose. Exactly. It's too on the nose. But yeah, that was a very intentional, the naming of him and the outlook that he has of counting down the last days of his life, and just being aware of his impending death every single day. And then, of course, as the book moves, he learns to have more purpose than he does at the beginning. And then the parallel, of course, with Tova, who is the main human character, who is also sort of staring down, a new kind of era in her life, a later era in her life cycle as well.
I mean, we were, it's a little hard to pigeonhole. I think I called it a found family novel, but some people have framed, I remember when I was watching the Today Show thing, the hosts were like, wait a minute, that video makes it look like a mystery. It's not a mystery, but I'm like, it's actually, it is a mystery. And, and then when I was thinking about what you said about Marcellus, it's like a classic deathbed novel too.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never set out to write a mystery. I don't read a ton of mysteries, like, traditional mysteries,
Right.
but, I do feel like, most books have some mystery in them or something that is unsolved or unknown. And that, that kind of just came about organically. Wasn't really
It
what I
helps
set out
drive
to
the
do.
plot.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That's the nice thing about mysteries, And Marcellus does like a good puzzle.
He does. One of the titles that I considered when I was trying to figure out what to name it, because for the longest time, this thing was just sitting on my computer in a file named Marcellus. And so I went through this exercise, and one of them was something like good at puzzles or, puzzling something. Of course, that was not as good as Remarkably Bright Creatures, which was literally sitting in front of my face the whole time, in the book when I realized, oh, that would be a good title.
It's excellent.
Well, and I think too, just them both facing down and their end of this passage here. And the mystery is just life is that mystery too. So you've got so many layers of metaphor and coming together and changes and transformations. Did you set out to have all those pieces?
Well, I knew that I wanted it to be Marcellus was sort of the easy part in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
In some ways it was very challenging, like, okay, I've got to figure out what an octopus could and couldn't do, and all of the logistics, and then also being very disciplined with his voice. But for me, figuring out the human characters was actually a little bit harder. When I started to think about what kind of human do I want to sort of put opposite Marcellus, I knew I wanted it to be someone who was sort of stuck. I love novels that have older people, so that's kind of where I went immediately. And I also knew I didn't want to write a sad book. Like, I didn't want to write a book about someone staring down the end of their life. Like,
yeah.
But I wanted that sort of pressure to be there, that impetus to need to make a change. The sort of like, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it now. Tova, she's got this group of friends, and they're all sort of, people are moving on. And that's not something that's exclusive, obviously, to the sort of 60, 70, 80, whatever plus age of life. I think I've experienced that, people get married, people have kids, people do this and that. And it's just sort of, I think a lot of the characters are experiencing their friends and family and people around them are sort of moving on without them. And they're kind of stuck.
That's sort of Cameron's issue. And I was thinking about that too, because you really parallel, I read a lot of books that I call quarter life crisis novels. And Lisa knows that I've been on this Jennifer Close kick. And her book, Girls in White Dresses, her first novel, is exactly about that. When everyone around you is moving on and you're not there. And it so parallels how that happens when you're older. And, of course, both Lisa and I have so many friends and customers sort of in that situation.
Yeah.
I love the way you did that. So
yeah, I did too. And they do parallel each other. I mean, it's not necessarily an age thing. It's just these stages in life, and living them down or living through them is what Marcellus is kind of showing us, and Tova too. Well, I guess, yeah. There's so much to talk about.
I love the friendship between Tova and Marcellus, because Tova's had so much problems with relationships in life. She has the nitwits, but she had her wonderful husband, which you don't write about too much, interestingly.
No.
Yeah. You're like, but her problem with her brother and her inability to sort of, the struggle to connect with Ethan, who's clearly would like to be better friends with her. And I'm curious as to how you thought about that relationship between the two of them.
Well, it's definitely exactly what you said. It's a struggle to connect. And, Tova has had a lot of loss in her life. She lost her son when he was 18. She more recently lost her husband to a cancer battle. And then she lost her brother, who was her last remaining relative. They were not close at all, but that's sort of a blow to anyone to realize, well, gosh, I'm really standing here. I'm the last man standing, so to speak. And yeah, I think she doesn't ever talk about it. And that's, I feel like, very much informed by just my own kind of like cultural background or family history. My grandmother was very much like Tova. She was a stoic Swede. She a very hard worker, very warm, loving grandmother, wonderful, wonderful lady. But everything was always like just fine. Like there was, never rock the boat, never talk about it. And I remember my grandfather was about 10 years older than her. And so he had passed away quite a bit before, she still had a lot of life left when he passed away. And, she just sort of stayed in her house, like, ironing her pillowcases and dusting the baseboards and just moving through this life, at least to me as a, observing this, I never really got to see, well, what's happening underneath, like, what really, what's the real story there? Or what's she really feeling? Or, how might it have been different? And sorry, I'm just moving out of this patch of sunlight. Yeah.
And you were too young to probably say to her, you should get a job.
Are you good to ask the questions like, how are you feeling? You don't think to be personal when you're a grandchild and there's an age difference. Even if you're in your 20s or your late 20s, you don't quite know how to bridge that gap.
Well, I think a big part of the problem is that I am like that too. Like it's something that is passed down, and it's something, and I didn't ever realize that until I was, a little bit older. When I was in my, 20s and 30s and she was still alive, I don't think I had the just personal maturity to, realize that vulnerability is important and that sometimes talking about uncomfortable things can be important. Like, I just was kind of the same, but that's something that I've worked on a lot in myself in the last few years, is trying to be like, okay, we can have open conversations. I don't have to pretend that everything is always just fine. Like it's okay to not be fine.
Yeah. And do you think you gave the characters those places to not be fine, or is that when Cameron came around and realized that he had to make things fine when things weren't fine?
Well, I think Cameron's in a little bit of a different predicament. He just sabotages himself. Like he doesn't believe in himself. And so he's got to start taking responsibility for what happens in his life and stop sort of blaming it on his circumstances. He does also need to open up, like when he's talking with his buddy and his buddy will try to press him and say, well, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And he just makes a joke out of everything and kind of brushes things off, or comes up with these crazy ideas like, oh, I'll just go do this. Sure. Like they'll give it to me. It's like, well, no, you're going to have to do some of the work to get there. But yeah, I think that it really definitely is a story about connections and when it can be difficult to make connections. And the moment that I always like to reflect on when I think of Tova and Marcellus is when she starts talking to him. She's had, and this is, it's not spoilery, it's fine. She's had a difficult day, and she's cleaning there, and she just starts talking to him, and she realizes that he is listening. But he's sort of listening without judgment, which I always find really funny because Marcellus is like the most judgmental character in the entire book, maybe in many books that I've read. He's very, very judgy, but for her, he is kind of that safe space, or that, I'm just listening, and I'm allowing you to say things that you have never been able to really put into words before. And in my mind, that's really when she starts to see like, oh, this is useful to have someone that you can do that with, and to say these things that have been just tamped down and not spoken for so long.
Well, I thought about, I was thinking about the Nitwits, her friend group that is declining, but the fact that she has defined the friendship by almost by activity. And there's definitely some, that's such a, we think of that as a traditionally male thing. You all go hunting together or bowling or something like that. And she's sort of in that. And you can see that, at least with a few of her friends, there isn't, she hasn't really been able to connect with them. In some cases, they like to connect with her more
Oh
than
yeah,
she really.
they're trying. I mean, and that's, I think Tova can be a little bit of a frustrating character. I mean, like the Jamie Ford blurb said, these are definitely imperfect characters. And I think one of the frustrating things about Tova is that she has this support system that is right there. And, her friends love her. They would do anything for her, but she doesn't want to be a burden. So she just, kind of closes off that path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she, to the detriment of really growing close friendships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, also something that I tend to do. So, hey, it's like all these things that I've learned about myself while writing a novel.
So do I.
Therapy or something. I don't know.
We'll recommend this book. Yeah, because with Ethan, I was going to ask about Ethan because that really, Ethan is just so like waiting and so trying, and yet he never makes that leap, and she just seems oblivious.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ethan's like the anti-Tova. I mean, when I kind of came up with the character, I was like, okay, I want someone who's just as different from her as can be, and who gets under her skin a little bit, but like in a very good-natured way. He's very gossipy, which she is the opposite of that. He wants to get into everyone's business, in a good way, but he's in everyone's business. It's a small town, and I kind of thought, well, it'd be funny if he was just like, he owns the only grocery store, so like everyone kind of has to come through there to like buy their bananas, and he just gets to have this fly on the wall sort of situation with all of the town's business. But yeah, I think it's partially just because of who she is, and then partially because she married young. She was married for her whole life. Her husband passed away. I don't think that she necessarily at the start of the book would ever consider like, oh, I could have kind of a second relationship or start over. I think she kind of is more defeatist about it. But he was really fun to write. I have no idea how he became Scottish.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
It's just like it popped into my head that way, and I was like, okay.
Do you think you looked at the map and saw the Aberdeen in the Northwest, and you're like, oh?
I definitely liked that parallel. And having visited Scotland a couple of times, pre-COVID, I was always struck by how much it reminded me of home, just with the landscape and the weather and the people. And so I thought that would be kind of, if someone were to come to the US on a whim and then decide to stay, they might end up in the Northwest, because that would feel like home to someone who was from that part of the world, or maybe somewhere like, upper Midwest too, I think has a lot of those same attributes. But yeah, it was one of those random things that I'm glad that voice came to me, because it was a really fun character to write.
And he was so yes, I'll do that. Yes, let's do that. Yes, he was a yes. Yes, I'll take you in. Yes, I'll help you out.
Yeah.
It was a nice voice that way. Taking those chances.
Genuinely loves helping people, which is, which was I think also needed in a book where a lot of the characters are just more like stoic or kind of, closed off. So he's the big, open, fun
road
guy.
Trip, four-wheeling guy.
Yep.
Pink Floyd wearing t-shirt guy. Yeah. I should turn this into a question, and I didn't have one at the moment.
May I ask one? This is sort of an aside, but one of the things when we talked to you at the store, I couldn't talk about the Today Show stuff, because it was all, because they're like, don't say anything. So I'm curious, you got to visit, I heard you went to the Milwaukee Zoo. And
I did.
How did that go?
Oh, it was so much fun. And I wasn't allowed to talk about that either. They want everything to be, they get to do the big reveal on all this. And I don't know that they did end up using some of that footage. They did in the little trailer that they made. There was some footage from the Milwaukee Zoo.
Right.
but yeah, it was kind of a last minute thing. We just realized, hey, I'm going to be in Milwaukee for this book tour. There is a giant Pacific octopus there. The Today Show producer lives in Milwaukee because she's from there and had kind of moved home during COVID and now was remote working. And so we were able to make this whole thing come together, and it was awesome. But when we got there, they were doing some sort of like electrical voltage test the day before. So all the animals were kind of skittery, and they let us go up top and visit with Chalupa was her name. And she was absolutely gorgeous. If you get a chance to go to the Milwaukee Zoo and meet Chalupa, she is just fascinating. She looks nothing actually like Marcellus, who is the more kind of traditional orangey, octopus. She's got all these kind of pinks and blues. She's just beautiful. She's much, much smaller. I think she's a female, and she's possibly younger. I think she's only been there a few months, or maybe a little less than a year. But anyway, they did let us go up, but they had a hard and fast rule of no touching. So I could get like nose to nose with her, but I had to have my hands like back here. And but it was amazing, even though she was in a pretty grouchy mood, I think, from the whatever this voltage test was. And then they tried to lower the water level in her tank to like force her to come down and see us. And that did not please her whatsoever. But she came over and did, exactly the thing, come and look at you and look you right in the eye and then put their arm up. And at one point she squirted water at me, which I think is not necessarily the sign of a budding friendship, but, but it was really fun. I was just so grateful for the chance to do that.
Wow, did you get to talk to the zookeeper as well? Or, the person?
I think the main person who works with Chalupa was doing something else that day. Like I said, this was like planned a few days before. It wasn't necessarily, and it was, only going to be that day because that was when I was there. So we couldn't really work out the details maybe as well as we would have if we'd thought of it more in advance. But yeah, the folks that were working there were so nice, and they, I think somewhat unexpectedly took time out of their day to deal with these random people who are coming in and demanding access to their octopus. Like,
it was so weird to hear that, because I had written to the person in charge of the octopus and asked if they wanted a copy of the book. Before I heard it, I never heard back. We don't.
Oh, wow.
The secret is like 5% of my emails are answered, but I will tell them if they're listening to this now, I'll still give it to them.
Yeah, we gave him a few copies when we were there, but I don't know how we have, but several folks working on their team. But yeah, that was really fun. It was a nice little encounter.
Sorry to interrupt, Lisa. What's your question?
Oh no, you were good that's such a good thing to talk about too. And how far back does your love of octopuses go? I mean, is this something that is fairly recent, or has it been a lifelong sort of, when you were a kid, you became fascinated with sea life?
Definitely more recent.
Okay.
It was a few years ago when I had kind of the idea for the character. And it was just from seeing this video on the internet of an octopus that was trying to escape. And it was something from the Seattle Aquarium. I think it had gone kind of viral at the time. And around that same time, I was just starting to try to write fiction. And so I think I was kind of looking for characters everywhere and just thought, oh, that would be a really fun character to write. And so in a workshop, I did this little blurb from the point of view of an octopus. And it really was what became the first pages of the book eventually. Many years and false starts and taking time off to have kids episodes later. But yeah, it was in my 30s, really. I mean, I've always loved animals. I've always, been a pet person. And when I was a teenager, I had I think at one time I had like a dozen lizards in my bedroom, which, my friends would come over and be like, "You are weird." I'm like, well, yeah, don't watch out for the crickets on the floor. But yeah, like creepy crawly things I've kind of liked. I like the weird, less soft animals.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing that a piece that you started just on a whim, not necessarily on a whim, that held forward carried forward to this. So any writers out there, hold on to your ideas.
Well, and also the fact that, I think a lot of people have talked about how you don't have to, you were in continuing education, right? Or most of the
Yeah.
classes. So
I've taken, it was my first writing class. It was just one of these, anyone can sign up. It's Wednesdays at 7:00. We meet for 6 weeks types of things. And I've done a couple of those now. A lot of community colleges have them. Sometimes libraries even have them, and they're like free or really, really inexpensive, which is awesome. But yeah, you meet like a really wide range of people that are in all different stages of their kind of own writing journeys. And, I hadn't done much writing at the time. And I looked at the class. I think we had recently moved to Atlanta, which is where we were living at the time. And the person who lived in the house before us had gotten the catalog from Emory for their adult education. And so we got the catalog, and I remember being just bored, like flipping through, oh, well, maybe I should, this might be a good way to meet people. Like what should I sign up for? That would be interesting. And did the creative writing one. So yeah, I always tell people like, just, take the class, like you never know what will come of it. It doesn't have to be a fancy university or an MFA. There's a lot of really great community college and continuing education and library programs out there.
Both Lisa and I work with a group called Red Oak Writers, and Kim, and like every so often, one of them gets a book deal.
Yeah. And she just, and she does like these monthly sessions where she has a book recommendation, and then she'll talk about it with students, and she has it at both of our stores. And they're just regular writing books. And I had a customer come in today, like, I need to get Kim's book, and he's writing stuff. It's a wonderful way to kind of get into it safely and easily.
Well, and I think the other thing that has come out of it for me is, being able to find critique partners and find kind of the community. Particularly now that things are starting to be in person again, like we can do that again. And it's really amazing. I would never, ever have finished this book without my critique partners and my writing community. And, you mentioned having had the idea so many years ago and kind of sticking with it. And I think one of the reasons I did was because everyone loved it. It was like, I would, show it to my writing friends and my critique partners, and they'd be like, you have to keep going with this. This is amazing. And I would be like, really? Am I really going to ever be able to sell a book that's written from an octopus point of view? It's like, well, you never know unless you try.
Yeah. We were talking about different books that are from an animal's point of view, like, and somebody mentions too, the Racing in the Rain, the dogs, and cat perspective too.
Yeah.
That
was a fun book. Hollow Kingdom is a favorite of mine.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little bit darker, but still just like wickedly, wryly funny in many places. And it's a crow, which is another animal like an octopus that I think a lot of people don't realize how incredibly intelligent they are. And I think we're, again, scientists, I feel like every few months there's some new article about like, oh, well, crows can be trained to do this. And it's like, really, that's pretty cool. That's Kira Jane Buxton's Hollow Kingdom. And she has I think a sequel too, which I haven't read yet, but that's a really fun one.
You had a recommendation on the Today Show too, I think, for another one.
It's ghosts, not animals, but but it is also very animal centric, and there are animal ghosts. There are. And that one was Unlikely Animals by Annie Hartnett. It's a small town, just really funny, easy read, like it's just very accessible read, but takes on some heavier themes like addiction and end of life and grief. And it is narrated from the perspective of the ghosts who live in the cemetery of this small town that these characters live in. And they are just, their observations are just laugh out loud funny sometimes, but then also kind of heart-wrenching at other times. It was a really fantastic book.
And this time I remember what the book was from the perspective of the elephant. I was trying, like, what's the name again? It's The White Bone by Barbara Gowdy. And of course, we had also mentioned last time Lisa and I had done have done these series of mysteries called Shady Hollow, which are very anthropomorphic, very different in that, because you have to decide, are you doing animals that are really people? Or are you doing trying to really get at the essence of the animal, or somewhere in between. Everyone's got, it's more of a scale, right?
Yeah. Well, like figuring out where that line was definitely one of the most challenging, and just felt like high stakes things about Remarkably Bright Creatures, because you go too far with the octopus and people aren't going to buy it. Like, I think I even had someone in a review on Instagram say, like, don't worry, there's no talking octopus, thank God. And I'm like, well, yeah, because, and at one point I did consider, okay, how is he going to communicate? Should I have him talk? Can he write them letters? Like, no, none of that. It has to be more subtle, more believable, just more disciplined, I guess. But that's a decision. And I think, you can take it the other way. It just depends on what kind of vibe you're going for and who your audience is, really. And I knew that I kind of wanted my audience to be like book club readers, literary fiction readers, not necessarily like fantasy readers or people who might not bat an eye at an octopus, talking or writing letters. But yeah, I remember worrying even up until publication, like, did I get that right? Like, are they gonna buy it? Is it going to be too little? Is it going to be too much?
And then one of my bookseller, Lynn, read it very early on, like the galley came right away. She had it read. She kept talking about it. She's like, I know this sounds really crazy, but it's about this octopus, but it doesn't talk, but it's just like you hear its thoughts all the time. And it's so amazing. And she just kept like having to reassure us. It's not weird. It's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, I always think of Marcellus as being, he's kind of like, there's a trope, I think, in science fiction where it's like the guy is stranded in space and he's just sending out these letters into the void, or these kind of journal entries into the void, and hoping that someone might hear them. And that's kind of how I've always thought of Marcellus, that he's just, I don't know that he knows or thinks that anyone is receiving what he's saying, but he just feels like he has to say it.
Yeah.
And he's alone.
Yeah.
Very lonely.
Oh.
I know.
We have, when you were thinking about your inspiration beyond, and first of all, I have to mention here that everybody should also read The Soul of an Octopus by Simon Montgomery, if you haven't already. And then I was wondering, were there other inspirations where you said, I want to write a book like such and such, excluding the octopus, but in terms about the human connections and the emotions and the grief? Like, what are some of the books that you thought about?
Yeah, well, I've always loved Frederick Backman's books. They just have that, he does like multi-POV so well, and he does it different from how I do it, or, how I try to do it anyway. But every one of his characters, they're imperfect, they're sometimes frustrating, but you end up just really caring about all of them a lot. And he's really good at writing just these little moments of realness that make me feel incredibly connected to those characters. And that's something I've always really admired in other authors' work. So I wanted to try to do that in my own.
Well, of course, we've all compared your book to Ova and other Bachman books, and you do have the Swedish culture in it too. So I'm curious, have you had any response from the Sweden, is your book going to be published in Sweden, or is it, is there interest?
I don't know if I can say anything about that.
Oh, okay.
we have had, yes, there has been interest, but I don't think I'm allowed to share any details.
Right.
But
okay.
yeah, we do have a deal in Sweden, but I don't think it's been publicly announced yet.
Okay.
And actually, Frederick Backman was one of the first authors that I tried to get to blurb my book, but and I had, oddly enough, met his publicist on a Zoom from my own book club. The leader of my neighborhood book club is incredibly plucky and has no issues. Just every time we're going to have a meeting, she just fires off a letter to their publicist or an email and says, hey, can the author join us? There's only like 6 of us, but Frederick could not join us, but his US publicist did on his behalf and chatted with us, which was amazing. So I had actually talked to her a few months before and had exchanged emails with her. And so I reached out to her and to see if he would read it, but I guess he just, as a matter of course, kind of doesn't. Like he's got too much on his plate.
Is that still like Aereo? is that her name, the publicist, or is it somebody else?
Yeah, Ariel.
Yeah. A long time ago. Yeah, well, I would say that I would certainly recommend your book to anybody who, plus actually people who follow on the readings from Oconomowaukee were like, wow, Daniel and Lisa seem to read very thematically linked books.
Oh, I know, we do. We've been in the Pacific Northwest a couple of times this past couple of years.
You were saying that you were getting the book.
Oh, yeah. It was because I read it early and then my brain's just the way it is. I kept overlapping with certain scenes that were in The Music of Bees, but also in Small World. And I was like, no, that's not this one. That's that one. No. And then, and even the Poet's House, there were moments where I was like, no, that's not the character in one of these books. That's that book over there. So they all sort of blended because of the landscape area, and the themes were similar. I mean, you could see the characters walking. I think in some of the books, characters could have walked from one book into another and had been able to push their storyline right along. That would be
I was thinking also about in Kim Fay's
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
With the intergenerational friendship.
Yeah. So there's 4 books.
Yeah, that would be really cool if characters could walk from one book into another.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
And then imagine how they would interact with each other or meet up, offer advice to each other.
Speaking of deals that you can or cannot tell, Angela and Jen wanted to know any movie or streaming or miniseries or anything like that.
Well, so yeah, we're working on doing a deal for the option. Of course, that doesn't mean that it'll actually get made, and a lot of books get purchased for option, but then nothing ever happens. So with the caveat of all that being said, that process is going on, which is really, really fun and exciting. And sitting there in my living room having creative calls with producers telling me their vision of how they're going to bring my book to the screen is just a whole new level of how is this my life.
Gail wanted to know the classic. Gail would like a sequel. She'd like, is there more? I'm not a huge sequel fan, but I do love these sort of connected stories. So if you were going, I'm going to ask Gail's question, any more of Tova, but more, and then I'm going to ask my spin on it, which was, if you could pull a minor character out of this book and give them their own novel, do you have anybody in mind?
Yeah, I think I would love to write more of Cameron's Aunt Jeannie. I think that a lot of her scenes got cut. Again, both from when I was doing my own edit before I knew I wanted to get it down under 100,000 words. And I had, I'm a very exploratory type of writer. I don't really write an outline. I just kind of write the characters and kind of let the conflicts come up and figure out how to shape it as it's ongoing. So the downside to that is you end up writing a lot of material that you don't use. And I end up writing a lot of material while I'm just getting to know the characters and sort of getting them in their scene and figuring them out. So I had a lot of Aunt Jeannie material that had to get cut. And I think she's great. I would love to just, send her on a road trip, or I don't know what the setup would be, but she would be a fun one to write.
She's got her tour. She can be touring to do her buying and selling.
Yeah.
It's funny, so many great writers talk about that, and it makes the story so much richer to know that the character has a backstory. So it's completely worthwhile. And now you've got a whole box of stuff to work with.
I was going to say that's never wasted time or wasted words, because you can tell when something's been fleshed off the page, really fleshed out off the page, because the character, you just know it. They have depth there, and you can feel the story has been well thought for them.
Yeah. And I think it's really difficult to do that without going through that somewhat painful process of overwriting it on the first time around. And I think my editorial team was also, I learned a lot from working with Helen Atzma at Echo. And, she was just very good at let's take this and just pare it back even a little bit more. Particularly with Tova and some of her grief and her way of processing that, bringing it off the page made it just feel more real and authentic to that character. And I'm looking forward to sort of applying some of those lessons in future projects.
We have two questions, two people, Amanda and Susie. Shout out to both of them, who do want to ask a little about writing process. We've been sort of dancing around it a little. And it sounds like there are several phases to it, because there was not only just your development of the story, but also the editing process was very, very important for you. But I'm curious, people, I will say the one question we no longer get is longhand or on a lap, now it's more like, what editing program do you use? But like, what do you think for those folks, and probably other people who haven't asked, what can you tell us about your writing process?
And I want to, before you start, I want to be while you're thinking about it, because your timing of reveals and pacing of how certain things come forward, and how your writing process, but also the plotting of that. So it was you had Easter eggs throughout.
For me, the plotting happens a lot on editing or redrafting, again, because I might know where it's going to end. I think I always knew certain parts about the ending, like this is where this is going to end up. This is where Marcellus's arc is going to end up. But I did a lot of just figuring it out along the way. So I think it's so personal. I've made a lot of writing friends over the last couple of years of doing this. And it's so fascinating to me to watch some of my friends who can write a whole chapter by chapter outline of here's the scenes that happen in this chapter. And then they go and write it, and it's awesome. And I'm like, but how did you think of that? I can't think of it. I can write my way into it somehow, but it's hard for me to think of it in an outline way. So I think my advice would be just experiment. And the only way that I know that I can't do that is because I have tried to do that. I've tried to put myself in that hole. And that's not to say that I won't ever get better at it. And I hope I do, because it is frankly quite a lot more efficient to just write an outline and then write a book, as opposed to this process of, I think there's an analogy of you're going through a forest and you've got a flashlight, and you know how far the edge of the forest is, you know where you're going, but you can only see sort of what's right in front of you. So you might make a lot of wrong turns before you get to where you need to go. And my writing process is a lot like that. And in some ways, I wish it were not quite so much like that, because, it's slower and it's a little bit more cumbersome, but that's my brain and that's how it works. So I think just experimenting to find what works for you and what doesn't. I have friends who literally can only write in one spot in their house with one type of tea and, one type of music playing or whatever. And then, I have friends who can't do that. They almost have to be in a different place every day. We were just having this discussion in one of my writing groups about habits and, whether they're helpful or hurtful. And the group was really divided. People's productivity is just fed by wildly different things depending on who they are and how their brains work. So I think you just have to find out what works for you. And if that's not the same as what works for someone else, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a really personal thing.
I think it's that lucky sock theory of writing. I have heard though, even that people who plot things out hit brick walls and have to read.
Oh yeah.
So just to make everybody who doesn't do that feel a little better.
And you just need 2 flashlights instead of 1. You don't necessarily need an outline.
I need a floodlight. Yeah. Instead of a flash, it'd be a little more helpful.
Wow.
I want to make sure you get all your questions in, because we still have to ask what else you're reading. And so there is still, we still do want to do that, but that feels like the last question. So if you have a question about the book,
Well, no, and the one thing I was really curious about is very specific, is the joke that Marcellus tells, the dad joke that he finally laughs at. And just what a ploy that is, and how you chose, of all the silly jokes that exist in this world, how you found that particular one that was so perfect for that moment of that book. Was it a celebratory moment?
My grandpa used to tell that joke.
Oh.
Except it
And
was
you just knew?
it was a monkey in his joke. It was,
Oh.
What did, I can spoil it, right? It's just a joke.
Yeah.
What did, and he's, when I was a kid and when me and my cousins were kids, he would tell this, and he was very hard of hearing. So he could only hear out of one ear. And so he would yell this joke at us. What did the monkey say when he got his tail caught in the lawnmower? Won't be long now. Okay. Ha ha ha. But yeah, I stole it from real life. I did a lot of that. And I think I changed it to a tiger in the book because I wanted it to be even a little bit more absurd.
Yeah. But there's in City of Thieves, there's a joke in a very poignant point, and I can't remember the joke. I knew it for a long time and forgot it. Do you remember, Daniel?
No, I could grab my copy.
Yeah, well,
I don't think we have enough time.
But it's just like how the timing that a joke, when something can be serious and a joke can just break that moment, yet be so profound.
Yeah, I mean, humor in writing is something that's very important to me. I am hard pressed to enjoy a book, truly enjoy a book that has zero humor. I think there's always a place for a little bit of humor in writing. So yeah, it just, it breaks the tension. It helps a lot.
So you did it well.
I am going to send your website, because the funny thing is your book club contacts the woman in your book club contacts everybody. And then somebody said, so can you talk to my book club? And I'm guessing, I'm like, oh, now you did it. So I'm going to send the shelbyvanpelt.com website, because that's probably the best way for somebody to get in touch with somebody who can get in touch with you.
I love talking to book clubs, and if I can swing it, I will be happy to talk to anyone's book club. The bigger problem is that the calendar gets kind of full at some point. So
you're booking for 2027 right now.
And and a lot of times it's in the evenings, and I still have small kids, so it's like, oh gosh, like if my husband's not home, can I really do this? Like maybe if there are a lot of snacks involved.
Well, they can always try, or maybe they'll get your publicist.
Yeah.
Does Sonia do book clubs for your book?
Oh gosh, I can't even imagine how
big
I would have to,
to
make poor Sonia do that for me in addition to everything else she does for me. Yes, I shout out to my publicist, because she has been absolutely amazing through the last, I'm going to say like 7 or 8 months of my life, taking me from someone who had sat in my house for 2 years and like hadn't had a haircut or worn anything besides sweatpants and had no idea how to do any of this publicity type stuff, and really like held my hand through all of it on like, okay, here's what you do. Okay, you're going to be on TV. Here's what we do. I'll be there with you. I'm like, okay, let's do it.
She is one amazing person.
Yeah.
So we were going to ask for a few more recommendations. Do you have a few? And yes, it can be something you're reading for a blurb that's coming out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's been a really fun little perk of being like a published author, is that you get to read, oh, you guys do too, you get to read books before they come out. It's like you get the secret scoop. But no, so one that I read and loved lately was The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich, which was also a Read with Jenna pick. It was the July Read with Jenna pick, and I was very lucky to get to do her launch event with her. I think they was like, oh, Read with Jenna authors can come together. And so I got to be doing what you guys do and asking the questions, which was really fun. But she is so sweet. And the book is just so amazing. It is such a great book for book clubs. I mean, talk about a book that really takes like, kind of philosophy and really hard questions and just slides them into this narrative where you're reading a book about really hard questions and like ethics and morality, but it just feels like you're reading a really great story. It was a wonderful book, and I really I read it in like 2 days before I did my interview with her. It was the week that it came out. It just came out a couple weeks ago. So that was really fun. I just got finished. Well, I'm not actually finished yet. I'm about 2/3 through Counterfeit by Kirsten Chen, which is I'm kind of in like a vacation reading. So I'm like, yeah, I want like a heist book about purses. Like, yes, bring it on. And it is that, but it's a page turner. Like, it's just a really fun, fast read. But it also has a lot in there about kind of culture and family and meteor issues. So I definitely recommend that. It's a good beach read. Like, that's my kind of beach read. Like, it's a fast read. It's a page turner, but it's not just total fluff. Like, there's actually some meteor stuff in there.
My bookseller used to call it light with a bite.
Light with a bite. That's great. I love that.
I could use that.
Yes. And then I've had a few ones that I've gotten to read for blurbing lately, which is fun. One of my favorites was Blair Braverman, who wrote a book about the Iditarod, a nonfiction book. She does like dog sled racing and is just a total like badass, sorry, my language, but like that's the only word for it, at all of these extreme sporting things. And she has written a novel about a reality TV competition in the wilderness that just goes, of course, off the rails. And I was a little bit, when my editor asked me if I wanted to read it, I was like, oh God, this sounds dark. Like, we're still kind of in like these dark times. But yes, it's called Small Game. Thank you. I neglected to mention that. And I think it's out in November. It's not too far away.
November 1st. Yes.
November 1st. But it is just such a fun book. The character's voice is so unique and gripping and just hooks you in. And like I mean, it's a little bit darker just given the subject matter, but it was not difficult to read. It did not bring me down in these dark times.
I think you should say, I don't know if she does now, but I think she used to train in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think she still lives in Wisconsin.
Yeah, she lives in Wisconsin, I think. That's what I read in her bio.
And we were saying, you said, it feels like she was on a reality show. And I said, oh yeah, she was on Naked and Afraid. And she was.
But yeah, I'll definitely be buying that one as a holiday gift this year for people, because it's a good fun read.
I'm gonna go find a copy somewhere. So very exciting. Lisa, do you have a final question?
I don't. Are you working on, well, I guess I do. Are you working on something now? Have you had a chance to start something new?
That's one of our audience questions.
I am. To be perfectly honest, I haven't touched it in a couple months because it's just been so busy. And I didn't realize how hard it would be to focus on writing like a new novel while still like talking so frequently about my other novel. Like, my brain is like, what are we doing here? But yeah, I am going to try. I'm going to write a second novel, fingers crossed. And, it's not a sequel, but it does kind of have, and I'm toying with having it be one of those things where there's a minor character who makes an appearance. It's kind of set in the same world. Right. There is an unusual narrator who is not quite human. That's all I'll say about that while I'm still kind of figuring it out. But yeah, it's still in the very early stages. I'm really hoping this summer to, this is kind of my last one of these events for a little while. I've got some book clubs and things, but it's really been a whirlwind the last like 2-3 months, and it's starting to calm down now. So I'm really hoping to have some more time to write and focus and get back into it. I'm always writing like flash fiction and short stories. Like, that's kind of my way that I keep using that muscle when I don't have the bandwidth to focus on a longer project. I'm like, well, I'll just join this, weekend long flash fiction thing and write some ridiculous, silly thing. But then like sometimes those ridiculous, silly things, can really be the seed of something more. So it's never wasted.
No, it's not. We're excited to see how you weave it together. Maybe it'll be the eels this time.
I was thinking it would be a sentient umbrella.
Or the mop.
A mop who falls in love with an umbrella. They seem so similar, and yet they just came from different worlds of wetness.
Didn't Disney do that?
Yes, they probably did. I'm just gonna put the link in again. And then thank you for a wonderful hour. So
Yeah, this has been wonderful. This has been really fun.
Yeah, this was really fun, and I'm about to get chased off of my sofa by this patch of sun here.
I
So
see that.
your timing couldn't be perfect. Thank you,
Yeah, it's
everyone.
cloudy
Thank
here.
you so much for joining us.
thank
Uh,
you.
We
Thank
wouldn't
you.
have bookstores without you.
Yes,
Yeah.
and thank you guys for hosting events like this. And as an author, I'm always happy to do events with indies because you guys are such a fantastic asset to your communities.
Thank
Well,
you.
we wouldn't have a bookstore without you either. So
Well,
you
thank
got to
so
write
much.
them and somebody's got to buy them. So we're glad you did it. Bye, everyone.